Hi, welcome to Botany 101 General Botany. My name is Angela Nishimoto, and today we're going to do session 2 on botany, the study of plants. Right. So the objectives for today, are going to include what actually is botany, what is it comprised of, Next, we're going to talk about some of the subcategories of botany and plant sciences. Yes. Thirdly, we're going to talk about life. What is something living? Okay. Well, how can you tell between something living and something that's non-living? And we'll kind of go into that too. Then we're going to talk about the chemistry of life. I know people might say, oh, chemistry, oh my goodness. But still, it's important to understand chemistry if you're going to understand living things, because we're all comprised of chemicals, all living things. Then we're going to go deeper into chemistry, talking about molecules and bonding, acids and bases, and the molecules of life. So what is botany anyway? Well, botany is pretty much the scientific study of plants, right? It includes plant sciences, and we're going to go into that. Okay. For one thing, you see this beautiful photograph here? We have one subfield called economic botany. Economic botany, all right, that is the study of plants as used by humans, because we humans, of course, are the only animals that actually have economy. We're the only ones that actually deal with, money and etc. So economic botany has to do with plants and how we humans use them. Okay. We also have another subfield called ethnobotany. Very, very interesting. Ethnobotany is pretty much social science, even though it is under the umbrella of botany itself. And ethnobotany has to do with the study of plants as used by special groups of people that we nowadays call indigenous peoples, including indigenous Hawaiian people in Hawaii, of course. We also have horticulture. Horticulture is growing of fruit trees and other plants that are of economic importance. Yeah, so horticulture has to do with the growing of fruit trees and ornamentals and vegetables as well. Furthermore, another plant science, if you recall from last lecture, we talked about mycology a little bit. We talked about these, if we go to the Elmo, we can see that these include fungi. Okay, so the scientific study of plants includes the study of fungi, even though fungi are not really plants necessarily, not strictly. But recall that fungi, they sit in one place. They're sessile organisms. There's a nice little shelf fungus here. Okay. Furthermore, the study of botany includes the study of algae. Okay, and this particular discipline, if we can go to the Elmo, includes the study of algae. And here we see, the long filamentous sort of structures here are actually roots of a plant that was growing in a pond that we have here at on the campus of Leeward Community College. And here you see all this green substances here. These are all little algae growing on top of the root of a plant. Okay, recall also that algae. Algae are not necessarily plants either, even though some algae are actually related to plants, but generally algae are considered as part of a different kingdom. Okay, so phycology, the study of algae. Okay. Furthermore, plant sciences also includes plant anatomy. What is plant anatomy? Plant anatomy, similar to animal anatomy, has to do with the cells, the study of cells and also tissues of the plant, such as if you were to take an A&P class, if you're going to go into medicine or one of the medical fields, you would be having to take anatomy and physiology. And anatomy has to do with the study, of muscles, muscle cells, how the skeleton works, and etc. Okay, so plant anatomy is analogous to that. You're going to study the tissues and also the cells of plants. Okay, we're going to get into that, let's see, I believe in a couple of lectures from now. All right? Furthermore, plant sciences also encompasses plant ecology. And here we have another beautiful photograph, very nice, and it shows a particular ecosystem. This is like a wide shot or a wide, wide formatted photograph with trees you can see shrubs, you can see herbs. You can also see the abiotic or non-living parts of the environment. So plant ecology has to do with the interactions between plants with each other, okay, plants with other organisms such as animals, such as fungi, bacteria, and plants and their relationship with the physical environment, such as soils, rain, implied by the clouds above, all right? Furthermore, plant sciences also includes plant biotechnology. So here we go. We see here something that you might see on TV, yes, with all those different kind of programs, CSI and Without a Trace and those programs. So here you see what we call an agarose gel. Interestingly enough, agarose or agar comes from algae, yeah? So they use agarose to make these gels, and what they'll do is they'll actually take DNA, extract DNA, whether it's from a person or from a plant, and then what they'll do is they'll extract the DNA, cut it up into pieces using substances called restriction enzymes, and then they'll pretty much run it on a gel. So what they'll do is they'll pipette the DNA samples into these wells on this gel, which is made of agar and buffer. All right, buffer resists changes in pH, and then what they'll do is they'll run the pieces of DNA on the gel, and the smaller pieces tend to go forward, and then the larger pieces tend to hang back. So what you'll eventually end up with is a series of bands on the gel. And so in this way, we can do DNA fingerprinting in the unfortunate event of a crime, Okay, so plant biotechnology, very important. We also have plant physiology. Plant physiology includes the study of the processes in the plant body, including photosynthesis, also including cellular respiration. Very, very important processes, okay? We also have the field known as plant systematics. And plant systematics has to do with the botanical naming and classification of plants. So here we have a nice image, beautiful image, taken by Dr. Gerald Carr, who used to teach at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And this is a photograph, very nice photograph, of a flower that we looked at during the last session. And this is Hibiscus ornatianus, also known as the kokio keokeo, the native white hibiscus. So this is a native endemic plant species that is native only to Hawaii, okay? And it's in a plant family known as the Malvaceae, also known as the mallow family. Okay, so botany, furthermore, is a subfield of biology. So if, say, horticulture, phycology, plant anatomy, plant physiology, and etc., if all of those different kinds of disciplines are subfields of botany, well, botany is held under the larger umbrella of biology. And what is biology? A lot of you might remember this from high school and from other classes you might have taken. Biology, okay, is a study of living things. If you look at the word, bios or bio means life or something alive. Logi comes from the same root as logic, so it has to do with the study of or information about a certain field. So therefore, biology literally means the study of life or the study of living things. Okay, so we're going to talk about living things such as plants. Of course, we have to think about, what is life? What actually, makes something alive? And so generally, depending on the textbook you're looking at, the textbook that we're using has 6 general categories for the different properties of life. Okay, so generally, everything alive has these properties. Okay, for one thing, living things, okay, grow, and living things do reproduction. What is growth? Okay, growth is, growth is the expansion, cell expansion is sort of like the enlargement of something that is irreversible. Okay, so growth has to do with life as well as reproduction. So on the Elmo here, we have here an ear of corn, and this ear of corn you can see has all these fruits. You might think of these as corn seeds, yeah, but they're not actually. These are actually fruits of the corn. These are particular fruits that are known as grains. And what you see here, that this is a result of reproduction, and it's a result of a special kind of reproduction called sexual reproduction. Okay, so you can see that these different fruits on this ear of corn, well, some of them have different colors. That's due to the events of genetic recombination, meiosis, and fertilization. Okay, so what you'll have is each of these fruits actually has a seed in it, and each of these fruits has different genetic materials in it, due to the fact that even though these are all fruits from the same flower, the same female flower of the corn plant, what you'll actually have is many different individuals. So the different corn plants that would have grown from these different fruits are actually, analogous to, yourself and your sisters and brothers, if you have siblings. Because as you know, you have the same parents, but generally you and your siblings will not look exactly the same. Okay, so that's sexual reproduction. We also have another thing that some plants do that is called asexual reproduction. And asexual reproduction takes place without sex. Okay, what happens is, a good way to remember this is that asexual reproduction comes about from one parent. If one parent, single parent, not exactly single parents in terms of humans, but if you have a plant that makes a baby plant and that parent plant is the only parent, that's asexual reproduction. And plants can do asexual reproduction from their roots, from their stems, from their leaves, depending on what kind of plant we're talking about. Okay? And also sexual reproduction, you can remember that because generally it takes two. You need to have a male parent and a female parent to actually do sexual reproduction. So plants do sexual reproduction similar to animals in a way, or at least analogous to what animals do. All right? Another thing plants do is that they respond to their environment. Let's see. So one of the things you might notice when you look at a plant, okay, what do you see? You see a plant that is probably, growing toward the light. So if you actually have a plant, on your desk in your office, or, you only have maybe one source of light, what will happen? Well, the plant will turn this way. The shoot or above ground portion of the plant will turn toward the light. This is something called phototropism, or growth toward the light. Also, if you have a plant in the soil, it'll send its roots down, yes, into the soil. That is called gravitropism. Anyway, so phototropism, where the shoot or the leaves and stem grow toward the light, and where you have geotropism or gravitropism, where you have the roots going down, growing toward gravity. That is a plant's response to the environment. Okay, so plants respond. All right. Another thing is that plants they evolve. Okay, we know that they have evolved and will probably continue to evolve due to the fact that we have. We have fossil records of plants that lived before that no longer exist. So we know that plants do change over time. Even though the fossil record in some cases is very, very skimpy, but still, plants do evolve. If we can go to the Elmo, we can see that here I have a cactus plant. And here, this is good because it's actually showing that this cactus has also little baby plants, the result of asexual reproduction growing off the side. They're like offshoots. Now this cactus here shows adaptation. What do you think the adaptation is that it shows? Think about it. Okay, so here we have the fact that the stem on this plant is the part that's green. Here where you see these structures known as areoles, these areoles actually have these spines coming out of it, and the spines are the leaves of the cacti. So cactuses generally have modified leaves that are modified to not lose a whole lot of water. They also have these stems that will be photosynthetic for one thing. Another adaptation is that this, which is sort of pleated in a way, because maybe it's a little bit dry. Well, in the wild, if it does have a rain, which doesn't come very often in the desert, here you'll have the fact that the plant can swell and fill up with water and kind of store this water for hard times, sort of like what people do sometimes when they're storing for an emergency in case of hard times. That's what you do with money too. You'll actually put it in the bank just in case hard times come. Yes? Another thing that plants have is metabolism. Okay, what is metabolism? The metabolism that plants have include all the different chemical reactions that go on in the plant, including photosynthesis and respiration, two main parts that happen in plants, all right, of metabolism. Other properties of life include organization. Okay, so generally plants are cellular. They're made up of cells. Okay, and that is one level of organization. These cells, furthermore, are organized into forms called tissues. Okay, so these tissues are organized furthermore to form organs, the plant organs, including the roots, the stem, and the leaves. So a property of life that we animals have, that plants have, fungi have, bacteria have, every living thing has organization, okay, in terms of its structure. Okay. The last point I want to make is that generally plants have organic composition or an organic makeup. Now, what does that mean? Organic means that generally it has a carbon backbone or a carbon-based structure. Okay, so organic makeup means that you have different kinds of chemicals that make up living things, including carbohydrates. Okay, so including carbohydrates, also proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. So all of us humans, as well as all of the plants that are existing, they all have a carbon skeleton and carbohydrates. The word itself, it says carbohydrates. So carbohydrates, you can tell right off from looking at the word, are made up of carbon and hydrogens, yes, among some other things. We'll also go into next, we're going into the chemistry, okay, of life, okay? So living things, okay, so we living things, we actually are composed of matter, including plants, of course. I like to talk a little bit about humans because sometimes people can, make an analogy between humans and plants, okay? So what we humans, we actually take up space, we occupy space, and another thing is that we have mass, okay? So living things and even non-living things are comprised of matter. Okay? Matter occupies space and has mass, right? Another thing too is that generally all living things are comprised of approximately 92 elements. There are actually 92 elements. Not necessarily all of these go into making living things. And the elements that are most important or that comprise most of living things includes C, which is a chemical abbreviation for carbon. Okay, H, which is an abbreviation for hydrogen, O, which is an abbreviation for oxygen, and then we have N, which is an abbreviation for nitrogen. So you can kind of look at this, CHON, and you can see that you can think of like an acronym like somebody's name, CHON. That's how you can memorize that living things are about 90% or more made up of these four elements, okay? Now another thing too is that these four different, chemical shorthand are symbolizing atoms, okay? And atoms are the smallest unit of an element that has all the characteristics of that particular element, okay? Now here we see the periodic table. And one of the things I want to draw your attention to is that you can see a very nice table here. It's color-coded, which is great, You can see here that the nonmetals are color-coded as green. And when you look at the green squares here on this periodic table of chemical elements, here you see that here you have H, okay, hydrogen, which we just learned is hydrogen. And here you have 1. What does 1 stand for? In this hydrogen, it stands for the atomic number. Okay, what that means is that in the nucleus of a hydrogen atom, you'll have 1 proton. Okay, so that's the atomic number, 1, all right? Another thing is that for hydrogen, 1 also stands for the mass number because hydrogen is made up of 1 proton, 1 electron. Okay, that comprises a hydrogen atom. Now if you look at carbon here, okay, carbon, abbreviated with a C, okay, carbon has 6. It has the atomic number of 6. So in the nucleus of a carbon atom, you have 6 protons, all right? And here nitrogen, okay, nitrogen has 7 protons in its nucleus, and oxygen has 8, Okay, so this is kind of important to remember, just because hydrogen with its one proton also has one electron. Okay, so electron, of course, are what is involved in chemical bonding. Okay, so carbon also has 6 protons, therefore it has 6 electrons, because in an atom charges are balanced. You'll have 6 protons and you'll have 6 electrons in a carbon atom. In nitrogen, you'll have 7 protons, 7 electrons, and in oxygen you'll have 8 protons and 8 electrons, and we're going to go into that in a minute. Okay. Okay, so we just talked a little bit about atoms and about the periodic table. Okay, and so we're going to go into next a subatomic particle. What does that mean? Subatomic means that it's under atomic. So an atom, okay, is at the atomic level. Subatomic is below that. So the most important of the subatomic particles include the protons. Protons are located in the atomic nucleus. Okay, that just means that it is the, sort of like the center of the atom. Okay, and generally protons weigh about 1 Dalton. That's why when we looked at the hydrogen, yeah, that square, that green square on the periodic table that showed the hydrogen atom, okay, or the square that showed hydrogen, you had the number 1. Okay, that 1 stands for 1, okay, in terms of 1 proton. And each proton weighs 1 Dalton. Okay, that's just the unit that they use. Another thing about protons that is important to understand is that protons have a positive charge. Okay, we humans have designated that protons have positive charge. Okay. Another subatomic particle which is important are called neutrons. Okay, so you can remember protons positive charge when you think of pro, such as you're thinking of politicians or people who are pro a particular politician or pro a particular issue. So that means they're for something. That means it's a positive thing. Yes? So positive charge. Now neutrons, which are also located in the atomic nucleus, okay, are also about 1 Dalton in size or in mass, and they have no charge. So you can remember neutrons by NEU, such as neutral. Okay? So protons have a positive charge and neutrons have a neutral charge, okay, or no charge, right? They're neutral. Next, another subatomic particle, and these are most important in terms of chemical bonding. These are electrons, and they're located in what we call orbitals, okay? So the protons and the neutrons are located in the atomic nucleus, and the electrons are away, okay, from the atomic nucleus. Okay. Furthermore, electrons have negative charge. Okay, so this is why the atom is held together as it is, because the protons have a positive charge, electrons have a negative charge, so they are chemically attracted to each other. Okay, so the electrons are actually held in the orbitals. Okay, and they're held near, around the nucleus of the atom because of these charges. And I believe in physics they call this attraction between the electrons of an atom and the protons of an atom as a strong force in nature. I believe that's called. Okay. Okay, so something that we already talked about, the atomic number is equal to the number of protons, okay, in the atomic nucleus of a particular atom. Okay, the mass number equals the number of protons plus the number of neutrons. Okay, so generally the number of protons pretty much set what a particular kind of substance is, such as carbon always has 6 protons. Okay, nitrogen always has 7 protons in its nucleus. Oxygen always has 8 protons in its nucleus. Okay, but generally the number of neutrons can vary. All right, so that leads us to the topic of isotopes. So say for example, when you have this little superscript, to the left-hand side of the symbol C, that stands for carbon-12. Okay, what is carbon-12? Carbon-12 is, actually exists when you have 6 protons and 6 neutrons. Therefore, you have a mass number of 12 Daltons, okay, for the carbon atom. So carbon atoms have 6 protons and they have 6 neutrons. Okay, whereas carbon-14 has 6 protons and 8 neutrons. All right, so carbon-14 and its proportion, you know, in the atmosphere, in the carbon dioxide that is taken up by plants and the plants eaten by the animals, okay, there's always a proportion because, of course, we animals were made also of carbon structure. Yeah, we're organic, remember? Plants are organic too. So generally, in any particular part of the world, there'll be a proportion between carbon-14 and carbon-12. Carbon-14 is usually a very, very small proportion, okay, of the carbon in any one place. So what will happen is that carbon-14 is radioactive, and so what it'll do is it'll decay, okay, over thousands of years. And this is a basis of what they call radiometric carbon dating. Yes, and when you get a little Geiger counter and you can kind of see what, you know, a fossil or something that once was alive, you can actually measure that, you know, the number, the amount of radiation that's still in that particular sample, and they can actually give an estimate of how old, you know, that thing is when it died and started to decay. Okay. Now another thing too is that generally atoms are bonded. Okay, atoms bond together generally at their electrons, okay, into substances known as molecules. Okay, such as something we talked about before. We talked a little bit about molecular oxygen. You can see it has an O and a subscript 2. Okay, so O2 stands for oxygen gas, and these two atoms bonded in the double bond. Remember that we saw that in the first class? Yes? So we have oxygen double bonded to each other, two atoms of oxygen double bonded, and what that makes is molecular oxygen or oxygen gas. All right? Another example of this is H2O. Yeah, H2 refers to that this molecule has two atoms of hydrogen, one atom of oxygen. Yeah, so you have these two atoms of hydrogen bonded to an oxygen atom, and that creates H2O. And I'm sure you know what H2O is. Okay, what is it? Think about it. It's water, yes? So H2O is water. It's a molecule of water. And furthermore, so H2O is a molecule of water, okay, two hydrogens bonded to an oxygen. H2O is also known as a compound as well. Okay? H2O is also known as a compound. And what is a compound? A compound is when you have two different atoms or more bonded together, okay, into a particular kind of molecule in a set ratio. So H2O is always H2O, two hydrogens and one oxygen bonded together in covalent bonding. Okay? Okay, so now we're going to get into chemical bonding. All right? So bonding, okay, has to do with electron behavior, all right? Has to do with positive charges and negative charges. So the first kind of bonding we're going to talk about are called ionic bonds, okay? What are ionic bonds? Of course, it's evident according to the name. They're a bond that happens between ions, okay? What are ions? Ions are charged species. Remember that I said earlier that you have a balance of charges in an atom? Okay, well, ionic bonding, okay, bonding has to do with the fact that some atoms, okay, are not happy. Why are some atoms not happy? Well, because what happens is that, say, hydrogen, if you recall, has one proton and one electron, right? The proton in the nucleus, the electron orbiting around it, yes? But the thing is, in that orbital that electron is in, okay, that wants to have two electrons in it. Okay, so generally you won't just find hydrogen atoms. Generally what they'll have to do is they'll have to form a bond with another atom, because this one lonely electron circling, you know, and being around that nucleus is unhappy. It wants to be bonded. Okay, it wants to have two electrons in that orbital. So oftentimes with hydrogen you'll have one hydrogen atom bonded to another hydrogen atom to form H2 or molecular hydrogen. Okay. So furthermore, in terms of ionic bonding, okay, what happens is that you can have something like this sodium chloride. Okay, what happens? You can see here in the first orbital, okay, you have two, okay, electrons. In the outer orbital, okay, of this sodium atom, you'll only have one, okay, electron. And in the orbital that is outermost, okay, in a sodium atom, it actually wants to have 8. And here you have a chlorine atom. And here you see this first orbital is full, but this one here has only 7. Okay, so this outer orbital of the chlorine atom wants to have 8. So what happens is that this sodium atom will donate or give an electron, okay, to this chlorine atom. Okay, so then what happens? Because one electron has a negative charge, okay, this sodium, okay, the sodium atom becomes an ion called a cation. That means it's going to have a net positive charge to it. Cation, you can think of it with the T in there, cation, C-A-T-I-O-N. So what it is that this sodium becomes a sodium cation with a net positive charge. What happens then? It has this electron going to this chlorine atom, then it becomes a chloride ion, okay, with a net negative charge, because remember, electrons have one negative charge each. So what happens is that when this sodium donates the electron to the chlorine, making this a chloride anion, okay, this chloride ion has a negative charge, and that's called an anion. Then what happens, because this sodium ion, okay, has a net positive charge, and this chloride anion has a net negative charge, they'll be attracted to each other. Okay, so sodium chloride, what is that? When it actually forms molecules, you know, through this ionic bonding or a bonding between ions, what you'll eventually come up with is sodium chloride, right? And what is that? That is table salt. That is a salt, as you know, when you go to a restaurant, they have it in those shakers, or if you have them at home, okay, Morton salt or any other such salt. So sodium chloride, it's a good example of the ionic bonding, okay? Another thing about bonding too, you also have another kind of bonding, which is a strong bond. I talked about that a little bit earlier when I talked about one hydrogen bonding to another hydrogen due to the fact that these, you know, two have only one electron each. So what they want to do, they want to form a bond and share 2 electrons between them, okay? So in a covalent bonding, what happens, this is the strongest kind of bonding, okay? This is when you have electron pairs shared between atoms. So we just talked about hydrogen gas or a molecular hydrogen. We talked before about molecular oxygen, where the 2 oxygen atoms, okay, due to the fact that their outer shells or their outer valences aren't filled, what happens is that they will tend to make a double bond with each other, okay? So they will actually have 4 electrons shared between the outer orbitals. Okay, so in the outer orbitals, you'll have 8, okay, for each atom. Another kind of molecule, okay, that is formed by bonding, okay, or covalent bonding between 1 carbon and 4 hydrogens is methane. Okay, so this is the most simple of the different kinds of compounds formed with carbon. So carbon is a very special kind of atom, okay? And so remember, we talked a little bit earlier that carbon, okay, is the basis for organic molecules. So why is that? It's because carbon forms 4 bonds. Remember that carbon has 6 protons, right? So therefore, they also have 6 electrons, okay? Because they have 6 electrons, you'll have 2 electrons in the inner orbital, and you'll have 4 in the outer orbital. But the outer orbital is unfulfilled. It wants to have 8 in the outer orbital. So what does it do? It will actually form bonds with other atoms, okay, to make sure that it has 8 in its outer orbital. So what it'll do, it'll share electrons in covalent bonding to do this. And the simplest of these is methane. 1 carbon and 4 hydrogens, okay, bonded together in the covalent bond like you see here, okay? So here you'll have 2, okay, 2 in the carbon inner orbital, then you'll have 8. Okay, so what happens is that this hydrogen will share, remember the hydrogen has only 1 electron, so here you'll have 2, you know, shared between hydrogen, so it's happy, it's fulfilled. Here you have the carbon with 8. Each of these hydrogen atoms are fulfilled, they're happy, their orbital is filled, you know, they're satisfied. And here you have the fact that the carbon has 8, okay, that it's sharing with these 4 different hydrogens. So everybody's happy, okay, once you have covalent bonding, everybody's satisfied, okay? So generally you'll have covalent bonding and ionic bonding due to the fact of electron behavior, okay? Now, recall that this is the strongest of the bonds as well. Furthermore, now we also have bonding. We talked about bonding between atoms in the covalent bond. We talked about bonding between ions in ionic bonding. And now we're going to talk about the hydrogen bond. Okay? Hydrogen bonds are secondary bonds that are bonds between molecules. Okay? A good example of that, okay, is here. Remember, recall that H2O, or water. You remember water. You have two hydrogens bonded to an oxygen in a covalent bonding. Yeah, so the oxygen, remember, wants to make two bonds. Hydrogen wants to make one each. So you'll have here a molecule. So these white parts of this molecule sort of look, these are representing the hydrogen part of the molecule, and this red part is representing the oxygen part of the water molecule. Okay? What happens is that generally with water, you can see that the hydrogens, it sort of looks like a V-shaped in a way. Okay, so the hydrogens is like an asymmetrical molecule, or it's bilaterally symmetrical, where you have a mirror image this way, but from this one and this part of it. But generally here on this side, okay, on the hydrogen side, and here is the oxygen side. Now oxygen, we're going to come to this later on in the semester. Oxygen is among the most electronegative of all the different kinds of elements, or the different kinds of atoms. What does that mean? That means that oxygen has a tendency to pull electrons toward itself. Okay? Now because of this, on this side of the water molecule, you'll have a little bit of a negative charge, because remember, oxygen has a tendency to pull electrons toward itself. So this side of the molecule is slightly negative. It's not a full-on negative charge, but it's slightly negative. On this side, these sides of the molecule, okay, you have a slight positive charge, because remember, the electrons are being pulled toward the oxygen, so this side will have more of a little bit of a positive charge. Because of that, in solution, okay, the water molecules will tend to bond together in hydrogen bonding, such as in this one here. We're seeing it from the side view. The oxygen part is actually bonded in a weak bond, okay, to this part of this other hydrogen water atom. Water molecule. Okay, excuse me. So here you see that in solution, the water molecules will be attracted to each other. The negative side of one water molecule attracted to the positive side, slightly positive side of another water molecule. This is what makes water sticky. This also gives water its special qualities in terms of life, because life as we know it is not possible without water. Do you remember the Mars, the Mars expedition? Okay, so what happened during the Mars expedition? They brought back some rocks from Mars. People were all excited, all the astronomers and all the physicists and other people, biologists, were all excited about this, because in the rock, they cracked it open, I guess under certain specialized conditions, they found ice in there. So Mars did have water on it, perhaps during some time in its history. So this is why everybody was all excited about it, because as far as we know, life is not possible without water. Okay? Anyway, so that's just a little corollary, okay? It's sort of like a little add-on. So life as we know it is not possible without water. Now another kind of molecule that is that the hydrogen bond is important in is proteins. Okay, proteins are among the most complex and largest of all the different kinds of organic molecules. And proteins are generally held in their three-dimensional conformation. They're actually held in their three-dimensional shape by hydrogen bonding. Okay, this is one of the reasons why living things, most living things can't live in really, really hot environments, because what happens is that our proteins, or our enzymes, which are proteins, they tend to lose their shape, because hydrogen bonds can be disrupted by heat. They can also be disrupted by changes in pH. We're going to go into pH in a little bit, okay? Another kind of molecule that is held together by hydrogen bonds are nucleic acids. All right, very important. Can you think of a nucleic acid? Okay, DNA, which is the code in our cells, in plant cells, that is a code for all our physical manifestations, our physiology, our biochemistry, our structure. It all has to do with nucleic acids and the information that are encoded upon them. Okay. Now, hydrogen bonding, furthermore, is the weakest of the bonding. Okay, type of bonds. So hydrogen bonding is a secondary bond between molecules, and hydrogen bonding is a weak bond, okay? Now, another thing is, we just talked a little bit, we mentioned acids and bases. Now, acids and bases, you might have heard of these before, yeah? So the acids and bases can be qualified for on the pH scale. So the pH scale is read from pH 0 to pH 14, okay? Now each unit, so the difference between pH 1 and pH 0 is 10 times change, so it's like a log scale. So each unit, okay, is from pH 1 to pH 2. From pH 2 to pH 1, okay, it actually gets 10 times more hydrogen ion concentration, because that's what pH stands for. pH stands for potential hydrogen ion concentration, okay? So neutral pH is pH 7. So pH is actually determined by physical characteristics, chemical characteristics. So pure water, okay, pure water has a pH of 7, okay, pure water, right, neutral pH. So pH 7 is neutral, okay. A lot of different biochemical events that happen inside of plant bodies as well as in animal bodies takes place at neutral pH. Okay, it's very important. So a lot of different kinds of organic, fluids and such that are produced by our bodies are near neutral. Okay, near neutral pH. The next thing is that generally acid, okay, so sometimes when people say something is very acid, it's wrong to actually say that the pH is high, because anything under pH 7 is acid, okay? So what is an acid? An acid is like a solution that has a potential to release hydrogen ions. So the more hydrogen ions, are in the solution, the more acid it is. Okay, remember that from pH 2 to pH 1, that's a tenfold difference, okay, between pH 2 and pH 1. So if something is very, very acid, that means that the pH is very low. Okay, so pH 1 is very acid. pH 2 is approximately about, your stomach acids are about pH 2, so it's very acid in here. And that's important because it helps us to digest our food, to break it down so our body can use the component, proteins and carbohydrates and, fats, that we take in, so it breaks it down in our stomachs and in the rest of our digestive system so our bodies can absorb it. So acid, okay, acid is low pH, okay, below pH 7, all right? And concentrated nitric acid is actually, I believe, the most acid pH you can get. I think that it's near pH 0, which is, my gosh. Also, you can remember pH is very acid, okay? pH that is lower is very acid, and it really does actually burn through things. When I was in a chemistry lab, my first chemistry class that I took, maybe the second, we're doing acid-base titration, if you remember doing that in school. Well, one of the things is I accidentally got some sulfuric acid, pure sulfuric acid on my finger. I got all scared, so I wiped it on my jeans. Okay, a couple of days later, okay, there was a hole right where I wiped my hand. Okay, where I wipe my finger. So that actually, you can actually, make holes in your clothes, okay, through acid pH, through an acid. I guess that's what they meant by acid wash jeans, a long time ago, right? Now another quality of acids, and I wouldn't advise you to, eat too much of it, but acids also have a sour taste, okay? So lemons are acid, tomatoes are acid, yeah? Let's see, did you know too that Coca-Cola is also very acid? Did you know also that you could actually, this is an email that was circulating around, you could actually take off the grease from your battery by putting a cola drink on it. I've heard that actually is true, amazingly. Isn't that amazing? So, so colas are actually very acid, okay? Okay, so here, okay, let's see. Now bases, okay, they're called bases, tend to have a pH more than 7, okay? Bases include things like chlorine bleach, okay? They also include things like drain cleaner, all right? So bases or alkaline sort of substances are more than pH 7. So if some substance has a high pH, that means that it's very basic. Now, what are bases? Bases will either donate or release hydroxyl ions, which are represented here by OH minus, okay? And what they'll do is that they have the ability to accept hydrogen ion. So what is a hydrogen ion? A hydrogen ion, okay, is a hydrogen atom. It's a hydrogen atom that has actually lost an electron. Okay, so pretty much hydrogen ion is a proton, because remember, a hydrogen atom has a proton and an electron, and if it loses its electron, then it becomes a hydrogen ion with a net positive charge. Okay, so bases will tend to accept hydrogen ions. Okay, bases, another characteristic of bases or alkaline sort of substances is they feel slippery. So if you actually spilled some chlorine bleach maybe on your hand, hopefully when you weren't wearing something, you know, something that has color to it, well, it's slippery, isn't it? Yeah. So different kinds of bases are slippery in feeling. Another thing about them is that they are caustic. So if you do get drain cleaner on your skin, if you were to read the can, it says flush with water, you know, right away. Okay. Anyway, so this is something, so it can actually burn your skin if you get something that is very basic onto it. Okay, so generally acids are very low pH and bases are high pH. Okay, so something is very acid, that means the pH is very low. Okay, pH 1, pH 0. All right. Okay. Okie doke. Let's see. Now another thing too is pH can affect plants, including the pH of soils. This is one of the reasons why that if you want to grow a kind of plant in your yard, gardenias or azaleas, depending if you have a lot of rain, or if something that you want to grow isn't doing so well, sometimes you can take a soil sample to the University of Hawaii, the CTAR, or the College of Tropical Agriculture and Human Resources, and what they'll do is they'll test the pH of your soil for you and tell you what kind of amendments, or you know, if you need to add more organic material or if you need to add lime to your soil to grow what you really intend to grow, because plants will grow best in certain pHs. There are some plants that like it a little bit acid, such as camellias, such as azaleas, such as gardenias, and others maybe like a little bit more lime or a little bit more basic. But many plants will tend to grow in soil that is around pH 7, neutral. Okay? Another thing too is generally the different kinds of biochemical events that happen within the cell, you know, happen within a certain range of pH. Okay? So a lot of activities in the cell tend to also happen near neutral pH. Okay. Okay, now we're going to do a little survey of the molecules of life. All right. These include the carbohydrates. Okay. And also, let's see, let's back up a little bit. Oh, okay, let's see. Anyway, so carbohydrates, okay, they tend to be made of mostly carbons and hydrogens, sometimes a little bit of oxygens as well, too. Okay, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, those generally comprise carbohydrates. Okay, so these molecules have structural components to them as well as their sources of energy. All right. Next, so carbohydrates include what we call monosaccharides. What are monosaccharides? Well, mono means one. Saccharide refers to something sweet. Okay, so monosaccharides are sugar units generally that have only one. Okay, one single sugar unit, such as glucose. Okay, so you can follow along in your textbook. Okay, toward the end of chapter 1, and if you want to see the chemical structure of glucose. Okay, let's see. Okay, so that would be figure 1.9, all right? So glucose and fructose, these have the same chemical formulas, okay? They're generally C6H12O6, all right? Of course, structurally, they're a little bit different from each other. Anyway, so glucose and fructose, these are two different 6-carbon sugars, all right? So glucose is generally the product that you get right after photosynthesis, okay? So glucose is like blood sugar in our bodies, and they're also the main product of photosynthesis. Fructose, of course, you can tell by the word, is fruit sugars, or sugars that you can get from fruits. When you drink a soft drink, you know, like Coca-Cola or Sprite or Dr. Pepper, one of the things you'll notice is that right on the can, you'll actually see high fructose corn syrup. Okay, so what they have done is they've actually taken the starch from corn and they've chemically converted it to fructose, right? So fructose is very sweet. Other kinds of simple sugars or monosaccharides include ribose, which is an important component of RNA. okay, ribonucleic acid, and also deoxyribose, which is very important for the structure of DNA, okay? All right. Right, so carbohydrates, okay? So we talked about monosaccharides right now, so the most important ones to remember are glucose, fructose, ribose, deoxyribose. Now disaccharides, of course, okay, have 2 sugar units making them up, okay? So one of them is sucrose. Sucrose happens when you have one fructose molecule covalently bonded to a glucose molecule. Those 2 bonded together makes up a disaccharide known as sucrose. We know it as table sugar. Another kind of disaccharide is called maltose. It's 2 glucose units bonded together in a covalent bond. So these carbohydrates serve as energy sources and also structural materials as well. All right? Okay. Let's see. All right. Okay, so let's see. So 2 different kinds of carbohydrates that are what we call polysaccharides, right? We have many sugar units bonded together, include starch. Starch is actually the energy storage source of plants. So plants will do photosynthesis, produce glucose, and then the glucose will actually bond to each other and form starch. So starch is a storage product of plants, right? So what do you think of when you think of starch? You think of bread, okay, bread and pasta. You think of rice, especially here in Hawaii. Lots of people, need to have rice with every meal. Okay, let's see. Sweet potato also has starch in it. So starches, very important form of storage for plants, and because of that, very important to us for our diet as well. Okay. Another kind of sources of energy, okay, in animals includes glycogen. So we humans, we store glycogen in our liver, okay, as well as in our muscle cells, because if you have glycogen granules in your muscle cells, it's available right away, okay, to the organelles in your muscle cells that will convert glycogen, or glycogen will be converted into glucose, and then the glucose will be broken down in cellular respiration to make ATP energy, which is then useful in your cell. Really handy. So when you contract your muscle, you're actually using up ATP, okay? Now the third kind of polysaccharide that we need to talk about is called cellulose. And cellulose is a structural component of the plant cell, which we're going to get into when we get into the plant cell. Okay? Now another kind, so we talked about carbohydrates, including monosaccharides, okay, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Now we also have proteins, all right? Proteins, very, very important, okay, in all living things. Okay? And proteins are comprised of carbons and hydrogens and oxygens and nitrogens and sulfur. Okay, so these are the main component of proteins, even though that they are actually, they do include other atoms as well. Okay? Now the subunit, or what makes up proteins. Okay, so if you recall, generally polysaccharides are whole bunches of monosaccharides joined together, all right? Monosaccharide units. Well, proteins, their subunits, or what actually builds a protein, are substances known as amino acids. And in life, there are 20 different types. So we humans, we have 20 different types of amino acids that form together proteins, all right? Now these amino acids are also, these amino acids also form proteins in plants, they also form proteins in bacteria, and they also form proteins in every other kind of life thing. So one of the things we'll say is that generally this is evidence that all life is actually unified. So if you go back far enough, we humans are actually related, to bacteria. It's kind of like a mind-blowing thing, but it is true, and this is actually evidence for it, that bacteria, animals, plants, fungi, protists, all the different kinds of living things, all of us actually make our proteins from 20 amino acids. So this is one of the reasons why you can take a bacterium and actually genetically engineer it and cause it to make human proteins. Okay, so we actually make human proteins from bacteria, such as something called humulin or human insulin. Okay, so people who have diabetes can actually take insulin, take insulin units and use it in their bodies because maybe their pancreas doesn't provide insulin for them, which is very important in terms of regulating blood sugar levels. Yes, so diabetes is a disease of a pancreas, malfunctioning of the pancreas. Okay, so these 20 amino acids comprise proteins. All right. So these amino acids, now what actually makes them up? For one thing, we have something called a central carbon. Okay. Okay. So we have a central carbon. Another thing we have also comprising an amino acid is something called a carboxyl group. Okay. So in your text, it's illustrated in figure 1.10, 1.10, and so we have central carbon, carboxyl group. Okay, we have another group called an amino group, and we also have a hydrogen, and then we also have what we call an R group. So let me go to the Elmo and we'll kind of draw. Okay, we'll draw this out. Okay, so here, generally here, okay, remember that proteins are organic compounds, and organic molecules are carbon-based. Okay, so here we have a central carbon making up an amino acid. All right, on this side you'll have the carboxyl group, COOH. Okay, on the opposite side generally you'll have an NH3. Okay, this one has a little bit of a plus charge. This one has a little bit of a minus charge to it too, or like a full-on. All right. Another component of an amino acid is the hydrogen on one side, and then here you'll have another group. So all amino acids, all of them, all 20 of them have exactly the same structure. The only difference between the different kinds of amino acid, between leucine and glycine and alanine and etc., is generally the R group. That's why they kind of abbreviate it with an R, because generally it depends on what's here that kind of gives the properties for this. But otherwise, all amino acids have the same structure. Okay? For this class, even though we do have an illustration in your text that shows the different kinds of, R groups, don't worry, you're not going to have to know this. I mean, you do have to know the basic structure, okay, and the different components of an amino acid, but I won't make you memorize this R group. But just to let you know, probably, okay, if you go on and major in biology, or you go on in horticulture or any other kind of plant science, and you probably will have to take biochemistry, generally you'll probably have to learn the different structures of all the different amino acids if you do that. And a good clue for you is that if you do have to memorize these structures, for me the easiest way or the best way to do it was just to draw them over and over and over and over, and then before you know it, you will have memorized all 20 amino acids, yeah? Because when you take biochemistry, they'll probably test you on that, okay? All right, anyway, so we just talked about proteins and the amino acids. Now we're going to talk about the structure of proteins, okay? So generally there are 4 levels of protein structure, all right? And, okay, so generally 4 levels of protein structure, and also, okay, just to let you know, we're going to go over all these 4 different types of structures a little bit, just verbally, okay? You can follow along in your text, and this is in figure 1.11 or 1.11, okay? And for one thing, we have primary structure. What is primary structure? Primary structure is just the sequence of amino acids, because what happens is, this basic structure on the Elmo here, okay? This basic structure on the Elmo here, all right? Here you have a basic structure of an amino acid, okay? And then what you'll have is one amino acid linked to a next, linked to a next. So usually proteins are one polypeptide, which is like a string of amino acids. Each of them will have somewhere usually between 50 and 500 of these. So you can tell from that proteins are very, very complicated. Okay, they're large molecules, they're very, very complicated, okay? So primary structure is just a sequence of amino acids linked to each other in covalent bonding, a whole string of them, just like beads on a string, okay? Secondary structure has to do with the hydrogen bonding that happens to parts of the polypeptide that are nearby to each other. What the polypeptide will do, it'll form a helix, or it'll form a pleated sheet, or it'll actually form curves or random coils, and what they'll do is they'll actually have nearby relationships with each other, okay, in hydrogen bonding. And this hydrogen bonding has to do with charges, the positive or negative charge of the different R groups that are near to each other. okay, in this long polypeptide chain of 50 to 500 amino acids. Tertiary structure, or the third level of protein structure, has to do with the bending and folding that happens in a protein far apart from each other along the polypeptide. So it has to do with the three-dimensional conformation of the polypeptide. Okay? And then the last, called the quaternary structure, or the fourth level of protein structure, has to do with, like all proteins have at least tertiary structure, primary, secondary, tertiary structure. Now, furthermore, some of them have quaternary structure as well. That means that it has more than one polypeptide making up, its body. Okay? So proteins. Okay, so here you can see this illustration, and this is a relatively simple protein, but you can see here, so you can't even see all the molecules, but this is a very good illustration that shows you that the structure of a protein is very, very complicated, very complex, very, hard to understand in some cases. But the function of a protein has to do with its shape. It can't do its job if it doesn't have its three-dimensional or even fourth level of shape. It can't do what it needs to do. In terms of enzymes, okay, enzymes, what are they? These are different kinds of proteins that will help facilitate chemical reactions. We have structural proteins, like in our body, we have hair, right? We have our skin made of keratin. Keratin is a kind of protein. So in us humans, and even in plants too, there is like structure. Okay, structural proteins. We also have proteins that function in regulatory functions, such as certain hormones, okay, and transport proteins that are in the membrane of the cell, in the membranes of organelles. It helps to move substances from one side of the membrane to the other side of the membrane. But you can see from this illustration, proteins very, very complicated, and there are many proteins that are much larger than the one depicted here. Okay, fascinating. Okay, very, very interesting proteins are. Okay, now the third type of molecule that we're going to talk about is called lipids, They're mostly made of carbons and hydrogens. Sometimes they have a little bit of oxygen as well. Okay, well, and the lipids are very different, okay, from each other structurally, but one quality that they all have in common is that they're not water soluble. You ever had a bottle of salad dressing, like Newman's Own, which is, I think, what I like, you shake it up, what happens then? What you have, you shake it up, and then what you'll have is you'll have the oil settling toward the bottom, you'll have the vinegar floating toward the top. Most of the vinegar is actually water, okay? So generally, lipids are insoluble in water. They don't break down in water. They don't go into solution in water, okay? So these different kinds of lipids, including triglycerides, these are what we call fats. Yeah, what it is it's a phosphate group, not phosphate group, I'm sorry. It actually has glycerol linked to 3 fatty acids, okay? And then you have phospholipids, okay? Phospholipids, we're going to see that in a minute. Okay, they have a phosphate head linked to a glycerol linked to 2 fatty acids, okay? Very important in terms of the cell membrane and other membranes in the cell. Waxes, you touch a leaf, you kind of feel it has a waxy coating on it. That is to help the plant, keep from losing too much water, okay, through its cells. So waxes, very important in plants, and of course steroids. In us humans, we have cholesterol, we have estrogen or estradiol, and also testosterone. So different kinds of steroids are also very important, okay? So structurally, okay, they also, so lipids serve for us, because of course us, what do? We store our energy source. If we eat too much food, take in too many calories, or what do we have? We'll actually have fat. Okay, so fat is very, very important as an energy source for us humans, okay? But the thing too is that fat actually does have about twice the calories as carbohydrates, twice the calories of proteins. This is why, if you go on some of those diets, they tell you to cut out all fats, which isn't good. You do need to have a balance between fats, between proteins, and between carbohydrates. You have to have a balance. If you don't take fats, you're going to actually affect some of your production of oils, like on your skin, and necessary oils in your body. You need to have some fat in your diet, no matter what some diet guru tells you. Another thing too is that lipids also serve as structural components as well, okay, and also hormones. Okay, so lipids, very important, okay, in terms of structures, okay. So here, oops, I'm sorry, let's see. Here we have depictions of what they call a phospholipid. It's important to understand that this part here is like a phosphate group, okay, that serves as a head, okay, of the phospholipid. And here you have it depicted. Usually in a textbook, they'll show it as a head, the phosphate head, with two fatty acids as like squiggly lines, okay? So here you have the phosphate group, here you have the fatty acid tail. Very important, phosphate head is polar. It has charge to it, okay? That's very important. Think about it. Why is that important? Well, because in the cell, okay, the lipids, the phospholipids will actually make up membranes, okay? So what is a membrane? A membrane actually has two layers of phospholipids with the heads of it turned outwards. Why would that be? Well, it's because outside of the cell as well as inside of the cell, think of it like a mirror image with another, another phospholipid on the other side. Well, because generally in the cell and out of the cell, you have water, aqueous solution. So because due to chemical behavior, okay, these phospholipids will actually orient themselves, okay, inside your body as well as inside the plant body to turn their phosphate heads outward and turn their fatty acid tails, which are non-polar, away from the water, hydrophobic part or water-hating part, so to speak, and hydrophilic part or water-loving part of the molecule. Okay, very important. So generally the phospholipids will tend to orient themselves in this kind of way, with this being the phospholipid head, this part being the nonpolar tails. They'll tend to orient themselves in this way. So you'll have millions of them all lined up, okay, forming the membranes. Okay. All right, so another important kind of molecule of life are the nucleic acids. These also are important in terms of their hydrogen bonding. So you can think of, say, okay, they're made up of carbons and hydrogens, oxygens, nitrogens, and phosphates, okay? And their subunits are made of nucleotides. So here we have a nice kind of schematic diagram of a nucleotides. Okay, nucleotides here, you have let's see, let's go down it this way, okay? Here you have the sugar, okay, depicted here. Here you have a phosphate group. And the third component of a nucleotide, okay, a nucleotide has a nitrogenous base. Okay, so nucleotides are the subunits comprising nucleic acid. So what you'll usually have is that you'll have thousands of them, just thousands of them all lined up, okay, going this way and also going this way as well, okay? So here you'll have one running in one direction, one running in the other direction. And all of them are made of these components, made of sugar, okay, a phosphate group, and a nitrogenous base. So you have one strand here, one strand here. What happens is that the nitrogenous bases will actually hydrogen bond to each other. So here again, like we saw in the protein, like we saw in water in solution, you'll have hydrogen bonding, very important, okay? Usually hydrogen bonds are depicted by either a dotted line or a dashed line to show that it's a weak bond, okay? Anyway, so we have a sugar, phosphate group, and nitrogenous base. Very important, okay? Very important. This is where our genetic library is. This is actually where all the information is which actually makes you, okay? Okay, we already looked at that. So generally, the four bases of DNA are adenine, usually symbolized with an A, thymine, symbolized with a T, okay, cytosine, symbolized by a C, and guanine, symbolized by a G, okay? Now, one thing to remember about these, okay, these different bases that are parts of the nucleotides, is that A always pairs with T, C always pairs with G. You can kind of remember, because if you take an A and a T, and you actually make a line down the center, okay, between one side, you'll actually get mirror images, just like the palms of your hand, yeah? So you get mirror images if you actually dissect or cut an A in half, or a capital A and a capital T in half. A C and G, or cytosine and guanine, also forms the hydrogen bonds, that kind of helps the DNA molecule hold together, okay? Now, another thing you'll notice, okay, is that when you actually look and see, you actually have adenine and uracil bonding together in RNA, okay? A and U bond together in RNA, whereas C and G also bond together in RNA as well, okay? okay? So we have adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. In DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, we'll have adenine, uracil, cytosine, and guanine, okay, in RNA, okay? A bonding with U, C bonding with G in hydrogen bonds. Okay, in summary, okay, we'll kind of go over again the objectives that we did. We talked about what botany is, you know, that it is a study of plants. We went also into the subfields of botany and biology, okay? And here, one of the things we said was that the different subfields of botany, you know, we talked about that, you know, including horticulture, including phycology, including plant anatomy, plant systematics, plant physiology. We also talked about that botany is a subfield of biology as well. Okay, biology meaning the study of living things. Okay. We also talked about the chemistry of life, that all living things, okay, has mass, takes up space. Okay, we talked about the chemistry of life, going from the subatomic level and the atomic level to the molecular level, okay, into the macromolecular level, or the chemistry of different living kinds of things. We talked about molecules and bonding, okay, acids and bases, all right, and the molecules of life, okay. Anyway, so let's see. So that's all that we have time for today. And I also thank you again for stopping in. And I hope that you know, this lecture was enjoyable for you. I know it's kind of a lot, it's kind of intimidating, but I'm sure you'll get it. Okay, just apply yourself and keep studying. Okay, and then what will happen is we'll see you next time. Okay, bye-bye.